Zachariah Graves stood motionless, a shadow among the cadets, his eyes scanning the barren training field. The Deathworld Combat Academy was a place designed for survival, a brutal test of strength, endurance, and willpower. The world around him was unforgiving, a savage terrain where predators lurked in every corner, and the environment itself sought to crush those too weak to adapt. Yet, for Zach, it was all just another day. He had learned early on to blend into the background, to keep his head down and his thoughts hidden. His fellow cadets, in their mismatched gear and bruised faces, clustered in small groups, talking in hushed tones or glaring at each other. The air was thick with tension, an ever-present reminder of the Academy's harsh reality. But Zach was different. Where others showed fear or arrogance, he showed nothing. It wasn't indifference, but something far colder, detachment. The day's training exercise was supposed to be a simulation, a mock battle against the Academy's elite alien training dummies. The soldiers were divided into squads, and each was tasked with clearing an area of hostile enemies. Zach's team, unsurprisingly, had been assigned the most difficult sector, a dense forest filled with hostile fauna and the occasional unpredictable storm. Graves. The voice was sharp, cutting through the muted murmur of his peers. It belonged to Warden Zorath Kelnar, the Academy's ruthless overseer. His face was set in a permanent scowl, and his uniform gleamed with authority. He was the embodiment of power in this place, a man who had broken every cadet in his charge with the precision of a surgeon, molding them into obedient warriors. Zach didn't flinch. He had already anticipated the command. He straightened his posture and met Zorath's gaze with unwavering calm. "You're leading the squad today," Zorath continued, his words dripping with thinly veiled disdain. "Don't fail us." There it was, the unspoken challenge. Zorath loved to test the limits, not just of his cadets, but of their patience. He knew Zach's reputation, the quiet one who observed, never spoke unless necessary. But that had never been enough for Zorath. He needed control. He needed to break Zach's silence. Zach nodded once. He wasn't a leader by choice, but by necessity. The other cadets didn't look at him with respect or fear. They looked at him with confusion. Who was this guy, the one who never spoke, never expressed anything? What could they expect from him? Nothing, or everything. Zach didn't know. The squad formed behind him, a ragtag collection of students more worried about their own survival than the mission. They moved like a herd, eyes glancing nervously at the ever-looming threat of the Warden's presence. The simulation began with a series of shrill whistles, signaling the start of the exercise. The cadets scattered, disappearing into the forest's dense undergrowth. Zach led them with deliberate steps, his mind calculating every possible outcome, every threat. His years of training had given him a sixth sense, the ability to read his surroundings with chilling accuracy. Ahead, a rustling noise, a shadow darting between the trees. One of the simulated alien predators was nearby. He could feel its presence, like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. The rest of the squad was unaware, their attention split between the mission and their fear. They weren't ready. "Graves, move!" Zorath's voice cracked over the comms, sharp and commanding. He had been watching. Zach's movements had been too deliberate, too precise. Zorath had seen enough of his cadets charge in recklessly, eager to prove themselves. But Zach wasn't reckless. He wasn't eager for anything. Zach's fingers tightened around his pulse rifle, but he did not respond. Instead, he motioned to the others, signaling for them to hold their positions. There was no room for panic here. The predator was watching them, its eyes hidden but always there. "On your mark, move out." Zorath's voice cut through the tension once more, louder this time, a command that sent the squad into a frenzy. Zach watched as the others charged forward, weapons raised, shouting in nervous excitement. But this wasn't the way to win. They would die if they kept going like this. He moved quickly, pushing through the underbrush, his mind calculating every step. A loud shriek pierced the air, the predator had attacked. One of the cadets screamed as something large and fast dragged him into the shadows. Panic erupted, and the others scattered in every direction. Zack was calm, his thoughts sharp and clear. He took the high ground, his back against a thick tree, eyes scanning for the target. He didn't need to rush. The predator would come to him. And sure enough, moments later, the beast lunged. Zack's rifle roared to life, its energy blast hitting the creature square in the chest. It let out a shrill cry before crumpling to the ground in a heap of smoke and sparks. The squad members who had survived stood frozen, staring in shock at the fallen predator. "Get back to your positions," Zack shouted, his voice low but firm. They quickly followed, all too eager to move on, but it wasn't over yet. The Warden's presence loomed over them like a storm cloud. Zack didn't look back at his squad. He kept moving forward, calculating, always thinking. But as they reached the extraction point, a heavy silence descended. The Warden appeared again, his eyes locked on Zack. "Impressive," Zorath said, his tone devoid of warmth. "But that's not enough. You're still weak, Graves." Zack met his gaze without flinching. The Warden's eyes were hard, like stone, but Zack knew something the Warden didn't: he wasn't broken. "Not yet. We'll see, won't we?" Zack's voice was a whisper, barely audible, but it hung in the air like a promise. Zorath gave a quick, dismissive wave. "Keep that quiet to yourself, Cadet. You're not in charge here." But Zack already knew. The Warden's rule was coming to an end, and when it did, there would be no one left to stop him. The Academy's walls were made of reinforced metal, but it was the invisible walls that were the most suffocating. Zack Graves could feel them closing in on him with every passing day. He had survived every test, every brutal training exercise with nothing but silence and skill, but now, the system itself was beginning to break him. The Warden was relentless, and his methods were cruel. It was morning when the order came. "Graves, report to the training yard. You're to lead today's final exercise. Don't disappoint me." The command was familiar by now, yet it always had the same bite to it, the same expectation of failure. Zack didn't answer. Instead, he simply moved, a single motion, without hesitation. His squad was already waiting. They stood in formation, their faces blank, eyes darting nervously toward him. They were as trained as they could be, but in this place, that was never enough. Not for Zorath, not for the Academy. Zack adjusted the strap on his shoulder and surveyed the group. Most of them were barely older than he was, yet they acted like soldiers twice their age. Fear was an ever-present shadow, but Zack had learned long ago how to keep it hidden. He didn't show it. They wouldn't even know if he felt it. The exercise was simple, yet brutal. The cadets were to infiltrate an enemy stronghold, and in doing so, they would face every danger the Academy had designed to break them. There were no rules, no mercy. Only survival. But Zack wasn't worried. He knew the terrain better than any of them. The question was not how they would fight. It was how they would survive the Warden. The mission began with a harsh blast of a horn, signaling the start of the drill. Zack led his team into the simulated battlefield, their footsteps muffled by the deep grass. Ahead, an imposing wall of jagged rocks loomed, the entrance to the enemy's compound. The heat from the training simulation pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. Zack's pulse was steady, but in the back of his mind, something was beginning to shift. Zorath's voice crackled over the comms. "Don't let your squad fail, Graves. You know the consequences." Zack didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. But the words cut through him, each one a blade that dug deeper. He knew what Zorath meant. Failure here didn't just mean a failed mission. It meant pain. It meant humiliation. It meant being reduced to nothing more than a tool, a soldier whose only worth was in the number of enemies he could kill, the amount of suffering he could endure. "Set the charge, Graves," came the voice again, louder now, as if to remind him of his place. Zack's hand tightened around the detonator. He was halfway to the compound's gate, the others still behind him, when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, quick, desperate, and too close. He spun, pulling his rifle up just as one of the cadets stumbled into view, his face pale with fear. "What the hell are you doing?" Zack growled, stepping forward. I couldn't do it, the cadet stammered, his breath ragged. The Warden, he's pushing us too far. I couldn't. Zack's hand shot out, grabbing the cadet by the arm, spinning him around. You'll die if you don't keep moving. Understand? The cadet nodded, his eyes wide with terror. Zack's voice was like ice, sharp and cold. He knew this wasn't the time for compassion, not with the Warden watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. His squad needed to survive, no matter what it took. They continued forward, the charge set, the countdown ticking down in the back of Zack's mind. Yet, as they neared the compound, a sharp crack broke the silence. A simulated grenade exploded in front of them, sending a shockwave through the air. Move! Zack shouted, diving to the ground, pulling the cadets down with him. He could hear the sound of gunfire, the whizzing of energy blasts from the enemy simulations. But the real danger wasn't the fire. It was Zorath. The Warden's ever-watchful presence, looming in the background, pushing them further. Graves! The voice over the comms was a low growl. What the hell are you waiting for? Finish it. Zack's teeth clenched. Zorath's demand was simple, but it was cruel. Zack had known from the beginning that failure meant more than just an exercise. The Warden had a knack for turning even the simplest mistakes into punishments, using them to remind the cadets of their place, under his control. They reached the wall. The cadets hesitated. Fear gripped them, but Zack pushed forward, setting the charge with swift, practiced movements. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, including Zorath's. The Warden wasn't even on the field, but his presence hung over them like a storm cloud, ready to break. Zack pressed the button. The charge detonated, and the simulated wall collapsed in a storm of dust and debris. But as the squad moved forward, another explosion rocked the field, and the chaos escalated. A few of the cadets fell behind, their movements slow and uncertain. Zack cursed under his breath. Graves! Zorath's voice was low and steady, but there was no mistaking the venom in it. You're losing them. This isn't a drill anymore. The words were a punch to the gut, and Zack felt the surge of anger rise within him. He had never been a leader, he was a survivor. But he could see it now, how the Warden wanted to break him, wanted him to fail in front of everyone. He wasn't just being watched. He was being tested, pushed beyond the limits of what any cadet should endure. Zack turned, looking at his squad. The faces that had once been determined now held nothing but fear. The Warden had done it. He had taken the will from them, and in doing so, had started to crack Zack's own resolve. A snap of movement caught his eye, a cadet, down, bleeding. Zack's eyes flicked to the others, then back to the cadet. The Warden was nowhere to be seen, but his voice loomed. Do what you must, Graves. Make a choice. Zack didn't think. He acted. The squad wasn't ready to face this. They weren't ready for the real fight. But Zack was. He stepped forward, his rifle raised, the anger now boiling over. Cover fire, he shouted, his voice cutting through the fear. He charged, the cadets trailing behind, their hesitation gone as they followed his lead. And then, for the first time since arriving, Zack understood, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a stand. Against the Warden. Against the system. Against everything that had tried to break him. He was no longer just a cadet. He was a soldier. The air was thick with smoke and tension, the aftereffects of the latest exercise still hanging in the distance. Zack Graves stood at the edge of the training field, his breathing steady, but his mind was anything but. The Warden's voice echoed in his head, its harshness amplified by the weight of his own frustration. You're losing them, Graves. You're not leading. You're failing. The words burned in his chest, like they always did. But this time, something in him snapped, a thin thread that had been pulled tight for too long. The Warden's voice was no longer just an irritation. It was the final straw, the last push. Zack turned slowly, watching as the last few cadets dragged themselves across the field, their bodies beaten, their spirits broken. His squad had failed, not because they weren't capable, but because the Warden's unrelenting pressure had crushed them, one by one. And Zack? He was done. Done being a tool, done being a part of the system designed to break him and everyone around him. He felt the Warden's eyes on him, even though the man was still several hundred meters away in the control tower. The Warden could always see them, always watching through the camera feeds, his presence as suffocating as the oppressive heat of the Deathworld sun. But this time, Zack wasn't looking for permission. He wasn't waiting for validation. This time, Zack was in control. Graves. The voice crackled over the comms, an icy command that made every cadet freeze. Report. Now. Zack didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge the call. He didn't need to. He knew the Warden had been waiting for the moment to strike, to exploit any sign of weakness. But Zack had already made his decision. He was no longer just a cadet. He was a force of his own, beyond Zorath's reach. The moment passed, but the tension remained, thickening with each breath. The Warden would not let this go. He never did. His eyes, hidden behind the cold facade of authority, were trained on Zack, but the distance between them had never felt wider. Zack approached the command center, his boots crunching the gravel underfoot. As he neared, he saw Zorath, standing in front of the glass panels that overlooked the field, arms crossed, face stern. He looked almost bored, as though he expected the inevitable confrontation to play out just as it always had, with Zack submitting, with Zack folding under the pressure. But not this time. This time, Zack had made a choice. You think you're better than this? Zorath's voice was low, sharp. The kind of voice that promised pain. You think you're above the system? You think you can defy me? Zack's gaze never wavered. I don't need to be better. I just need to be free. For the first time, Zack's voice was calm, steady. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He had nothing left to lose. Zorath's lips curled into a thin smile, as if he found the idea amusing. Freedom? You'll die without discipline, cadet. You'll die without purpose. He stepped forward, his boots clicking against the cold metal floor, the echo of his steps reverberating through the sterile room. You're nothing without the academy. You're nothing without me. Zack stood tall, his posture unyielding. He didn't flinch at the threat. The Warden had used those words on countless others, had broken so many with the idea that they needed him, needed the system. But Zack had learned a different truth: the system didn't break people. People broke the system. I've never needed you, Zack said, his voice growing stronger. I just needed to survive. But now, I'm done. Zorath's smile faltered for a moment, the flicker of surprise betraying him. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to cadets defying him so openly, without fear, without hesitation. You think you can just walk away from this? Zorath sneered. You think you can challenge me and get away with it? You're nothing more than a weapon to be used. You're an experiment, Graves. Nothing more. Zack's jaw tightened. He was done hearing the lies. No. I'm a person. Not a weapon. The Warden's face twisted with rage, his eyes narrowing into slits. You are nothing without me. You owe your life to this academy. You owe everything to me. Without another word, Zorath lunged forward, a blur of motion. But Zack was faster, his instincts kicking in before the Warden even closed the distance. He sidestepped, moving with precision, his body flowing with the same practiced grace he had used on the field. The Warden stumbled past him, momentarily off balance. And that's when it happened. In one smooth, almost casual motion, Zack grabbed Zorath by the neck. His fingers tightened around the Warden's throat with an unrelenting grip, and in that instant, everything fell away. The academy, the training, the expectations, they no longer mattered. Zorath's eyes widened in shock, the words dying in his throat. He struggled against Zack's grip, his hands flailing, but it was too late. The Warden had underestimated the power of defiance. Underestimated what it meant to truly break free. With a sickening snap, Zack twisted, the bones of the Warden's neck snapping under his strength. Zorath's body went limp in an instant, collapsing to the ground with a thud. The room was silent, save for the ringing in Zack's ears, the thumping of his own heart. For a moment, he stood there, staring down at the body of the man who had ruled over him, over them, with such cruelty. Zack's chest rose and fell, his breathing steadying. The adrenaline rushed through him, but there was no fear, no guilt. Only clarity. The system was broken. The Warden was gone. And Zack was free. It didn't matter what came next. There would be consequences, yes. There would be punishment. But in this moment, Zack had taken control of his own fate. No one could ever take that from him again. He turned and walked away, leaving the lifeless body behind, his steps unwavering, the weight of the future now resting squarely on his shoulders. The Academy had tried to break him, had tried to make him a tool. But Zack had proven one thing: even the strongest system couldn't withstand the power of the human spirit. Zack wasn't a soldier anymore. He was something more. And no one, not even the galaxy itself, could take that from him.